Hello, if this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome. If it's not your first time, if you've been here before, welcome back. I wanted to continue on from a video, my prior video I uploaded about feminizing my voice. This is about thinking like a woman. It's all on my journey to portraying or impersonating a woman, my journey towards cosplay as Samantha. If you don't know already, Samantha, I've been into female impersonation, or at least I've been interested in it as a challenge to see if I can do it. It incorporates a lot of my personal interests. Number one, I'm very artistic. Number two, I am just fascinated by the look of women and and I saw it as an interesting challenge. I want to experience what it feels like through what it feels like. I want to say from a woman's point of view, meaning I know I can't physically change into one, and I wouldn't want to. Well, if somebody gave me like 24 hours to be one, okay, but it would be a major step to actually physically change. So I'm still curious what it feels like, how people would interact with me and so forth. What the experience is like for a woman interacting in the world. So anyway, I talked in my prior video about how I've gone about feminizing my voice. Not permanently, I mean building up the skill to speak in well, I don't want to do it now, but I'm in a different frame of mind, but speaking in a more feminine voice when I need to, when I'm dressed up. But as with any good acting skill or talent, you need to put yourself into the role and to think like that person. So this also this ties in with another thing that I had been wanting to mention again in my channel. A number of videos, particularly early on after the inception of this channel, they haven't been deleted, they've simply been privatized. I don't know whether I will decide to, in the future, unprivatize them and make them public again, but that's not for the time being. I wanted to talk about Dramatica. It certainly helps give a new perspective, a new insight into how a woman would think, according to this theory. I'll explain Dramatica. It was developed by two college students, two film students. They had made a film quickly. They had made a film. It was so-so. I don't know if you can still see it in a streaming service. I think it was on Amazon Prime. It had to have been on Amazon Prime at some point because that's the only way I saw it. It was called The Strangeness, if you ever come across it. So it would have been about 1979 or 1980. And it was with David, forget David's last name, David H. something, and Chris Huntley. And they decided that before they go on to their next film, they should understand how film structure works. So they also decided, after I believe a little bit of work trying to figure out how film structure works, they decided we don't have enough life experience. So they split up and they decided to reunite 10 years later. That's what they did. By that point, one of them, David, excuse me for using a dead name, I hope that's okay, had been undergoing sexual reassignment surgery, and that included hormones. And from this point on, I will refer to this person as she. So she had then been going by the name Melanie. Melanie noticed quite a number of things that enabled her, well, enabled the both of them to develop this unique theory of film structure. I don't think the power of Dramatica would have been so amazing, so wonderful if she hadn't undergone this surgery and this new transformational experience. Of course, I know Chris contributed a lot, and I'm probably leaving out a number of other people who contributed. Uh, all right, so they unveiled it around 1991, 92, 93, and they have an engine which predicts sequences of theme and plot in a movie. They have four main character elements and four objective story elements. Now, each element, what I call an element, is a binary decision between this and that. You go through, and for the main character, you decide this or that for four different characteristics, and then the same for four aspects of the objective story. That's only part of it. That's a small part of it. The theory talks about four different through lines in a story, in a complete, well-told narrative, fully told narrative. There's the main character, there's the impact character, there's the objective story, and the subjective story. Now, people throw around terminology in screenwriting books. They equate the main character with the protagonist, and they get a whole bunch of stuff confused. Well, one of the beauties of this theory is that it precisely defines terminology. The main character's function in the story is not just a lead or primary character in the story. The main character's function is to be the eyes of the audience, like an avatar, the eyes of the audience into the story. And it plays another part. I'll get to that later. Gets into the sequencing of the events in the story. The impact character is not just an obstacle or antagonist or whatever. It could be an antagonist, but these are two different roles. The impact character, or sometimes it's called the obstacle character, provides an alternative point of view to resolving the main character's dilemma. Now, I'll call it dilemma or conflict precisely because it's a conflict between two equally possible, equally seeable and understandable values. One example is that you have all life is precious, and you also have a lion attacking you. Now, you value your own life, and in self-defense, should you kill the lion, but you value all life. So there's a conflict there. There's an inherent conflict in that. That is true conflict, as opposed to simply lots of action. Now, there's a story engine that enables. Okay, sorry, forgive me. I have to explain the rest of this. All right, so there are four through lines: main character, impact character, and then the objective story. That's where you have the protagonist, the antagonist, and then these other characters. The protagonist has a function simply to pursue the story goal. The antagonist simply has a function to avoid or prevent the goal. And then you have support. You could have one or two characters. You have to have characters representing these other traits. Aside from pursue, consider, which would be the protagonist, and then reconsider and avoid or prevent, which would be the antagonist. You would have support, oppose, faith, controlled, reason, so forth. These other different things. Those elements that you find at the bottom of the chart, the three-dimensional chart. They express aspects of the point of the story, the goal of the story, the theme of the story, more so the issue, the theme of the story. Now, the impact character's role is to not oppose the protagonist, it's to provide an alternative to the main character's personal problem. You may notice that in movies, there is an objective story. There's a huge plot that involves all the characters, and then there's some kind of personal problem that the main character, you notice, is personally dealing with. I'll just throw out off the top of my head, off the cuff, I'll think up an example. Imagine a World War II movie, and the main character, meanwhile, is going through experiencing a divorce. Now, both elements, both problems could relate thematically to each other. The main character experiencing this divorce is experiencing some kind of separation. Anyway, all right. I was linking it up with the Civil War instead of World War II. Anyway, all right. Skip that. Anyway, suffice it to say, the main character is going through his own personal problem, which should, in some sense, relate thematically. It's not the same thing, but it should relate thematically to the objective story. The objective story is about the Allies must have victory over the Axis powers in World War II. The protagonist might be the main character. You have one character, but you have two different roles. You have a main character and a protagonist. They may be embodied within the same player, as the theory terminology goes. You may have one player. Let's say Mike Nelson is the primary character. He may be pursuing the goal of defeating the Nazis in World War II. That's a protagonist. But in personal, quiet moments himself, you can, as you follow the story, he's also dealing with a divorce. That's not him as protagonist. That's him as main character. That's the audience's personal bonding and personal experiencing of the whole story through this character's eyes, through this character who's going through a divorce. Now, he goes about it in a certain way. There's the impact character who has a completely separate arc. The impact character's role is to provide an alternative way of dealing with that divorce. You also have a subjective story arc, which is called the heart of the story. The objective story is the head of the story. The subjective story is the heart of the story. That deals with how these different characters relate on a personal level. It's sort of like the main character, in that the main character you bond with personally. You can see some personal, emotional, I don't know how else to put it, some kind of personal feelings. You have different characters relating to each other in that same way, but that's not the main character. That's the subjective story arc. So you have, through the course of a story, you have 4 through lines going simultaneously, and it depends on how the writer combines them, links them together in the way they cut the scenes. But you have 4 through lines going simultaneously, and I don't want to get into this, but basically the theory works in 4s. So there's an explanation as to why it's each through line itself is split into 4 quarters sequentially, and then those roughly called acts. And then each act, so to speak, is further split into 4s, and then each of those is split into fours. To put it simply, as I said before, there's a three-dimensional, it's like a Rubik's Cube. Imagine 4 levels high of this chart, Dramatica chart, and then uh, four, it's in 4 towers, and then each of the towers is split into 4 levels. All right. So what the movie is doing really is it's going through each through line, trying to accomplish this goal, or trying to resolve, I should say, resolve this conflict. It's going through da 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 da, and then that unit is finished after exploring 4 units, and then it goes to the next collection of 4 units, and then the next collection of 4 units, and so forth. All right, the theory goes into a lot more, but I'll just end it with that. Okay, now I'll go back to the 4 questions, or the 4 elements that I mentioned in terms of main character. One of them has been called by many things. It has been for a while called the problem-solving style. However, there's a developer who has taken this theory and modified the terminology, not the theory itself, but the terminology, to make it more accurate. The theory talks about 2 different mindsets, linear and holistic, and this is where I get to my point about playing the role of a woman accurately, or learning how to, when I'm dressed as Samantha, portraying a woman, to react and behave and think like a woman. There's holistic and linear. Linear is very cause and effect. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. Holistic is more about relationships. You have perhaps like a circle, you have different relationships, and if you want a certain result, you put emphasis on this so that these other factors adjust. In some sense, it's like waves and particles. A particle is like very binary, yes, no. A particle is at this point, it's not at this point, it's not over here, it's over here. Whereas a wave is more like this. So in the same way, you have some people who think more linearly and some people who think more holistically. Now, remember Melanie, one of the 2 people who had, one of the 2 co-founders who had developed the theory, she had been undergoing sex reassignment surgery and been taking hormones, and she discovered and developed this idea that women look for, well, she was reaching for toothpaste one time, and she realized she wasn't reaching for the shape, which would be a linear delineation between one space and another. She was looking, if I remember correctly, she noticed she reached for the color of the toothpaste. And that's more a matter of variation. You don't have just red and blue. See, a guy would think in terms of red, blue, pink, purple, black, brown, whereas it's been noted women tend to say fuchsia or light pink or dark, terms of tones and degrees of color. So she incorporated into the theory that men tend, and she is under the impression, it's her suspicion, that this is biological. It's naturally conditioned. That men, for the most part, or on average, men think linearly and women think holistically, and she gets into hormones and chromosomes, not chromosomes, but like, she gets into the chemical aspect of this idea, this premise. But anyway, so what are the characteristics that differentiate holistic and linear? Linear is about Linear is about solving problems. Linear is about achieving goals. Holistic is more about adjusting relationships. It's more about shifting one thing in relation to another thing. You want this result, you adjust these factors to get what you want. So it's very interesting. There's a third person I'll mention. He's been very active. I personally would consider him the third player in this two-person, two co-founder theory. Uh, he has a website called Subtext, subtxt.app. I'll put a link to one of his videos that explains this in the somewhere in the details in the part below. He tries to get the terminology to be more accurate than the dumbed down version that the two co-founders have had to release. So that's why he changed the term from what was it? Problem solving style. Main character's problem solving style. He changed it to mindset, which is a lot better. I mean, in my opinion, a lot more accurate. It affects, he noticed, it affects the order of events in the story. There's a movie called The Matrix, and when he tried to calculate the story form, tried to figure it out so that it would predict and calculate the order of events in the story, he found that doing it, assuming the main character has a male mindset, it put it slightly in the wrong order. Like it put it in the order of events accurately, predicted them, but the last two in each section of 4 was flipped. The final 2 were flipped. And when he simply changed the mindset from linear male to holistic female, it flipped it. So the order became more precise. Now, I feel like I'm being vague in what I mean by the 4s. Remember I said before there are acts, 4 acts. And of course, each of the 4 through lines has 4 acts. Now, within each act, there are 4 loosely called sequences. And then those sequences are split up into 4 further linear units. It has to be linear because you're experiencing the movie in a linear fashion. So it goes like Act 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then each of those 1, 2, 3, 4s has 1, 2, 3, 4. So in each collection of 4, the final 2 were flipped out of sequence from the way you would see them. They would be portrayed in the movie as you're watching it. However, when he adjusted it from linear to holistic, it flipped to be accurate. Now that's stunning. That's very stunning. It shows that it's a truly scientific theory that you can test. It also gives you great insight into what many people through the centuries have joked about and have wondered. How do men think? How do women think? It offers a wonderful insight into psychology. Chris, the other co-founder, has expressed concern that we don't take this too far and it becomes like a cult or some type of obedient following to this theory. But I think it's very insightful, and I think there are psychological applications to this. I think there are interesting insights that we should study that this provides. I know I've seen videos of them talking about governmental agencies employing help from this theory in their efforts to, for example, de-escalate tensions, de-escalate like hostage situations and so forth, and perhaps international relations. Perhaps it will help internationally or sociologically in terms of us getting along with each other at a local level as well as an international level. I know I've read Melanie's blog has talked more about that. All right, so somewhere in a notebook I wrote down the movies, the way this third person I'd been talking about, who has this app, Subtext app, all right, has phrased it. There are certain movies where the main character is linear thinking, and as I've said before, that controls the order of the events in the movie. There are linear main characters and there are holistic main characters. I mean, there are movies with linear main characters, there are movies with holistic main characters. And I wrote all these notes in a notebook, which I'm kind of involved with other things. I don't have the time right now. I'm so eager to express this. I didn't want to go hunting for it, but I did gather up some names and some information from that video that I'll link below. Here are the movies that he identifies with linear main characters. Not that they're very male-oriented, simply that the main character thinks in a linear mindset, in a linear way of thinking. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Tenet, White Tiger, Kajillion, The Vast of Night, Hamilton, The Color of Money, The Jungle Book, Top Gun, Jojo Rabbit, can't read that, A Few Good Men, Marriage Story, which is very I haven't seen the movie, but from what I know of the premise, it's not macho at all. It seems very relationship oriented, and yet the main character apparently from this is a linear thinker. And Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, here are movie examples that he gave that have a holistic main character, Do the Right Thing, which you wouldn't think of as a girly movie or a chick flick, and yet the main character has a holistic problem-solving style, or I shouldn't say problem-solving style, holistic mindset. Disney's Peter Pan, the animated Peter Pan. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Ford versus Ferrari, Elf, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Mean Girls. And of course, if it's a movie called Mean Girls that involves girls, would probably have a holistic mindset. Mississippi Burning, The Fault in Our Stars, Leave No Trace, and Roma. Now, this is a key aspect. Back in like 92 or 93, something like that, the capability of computing and computers wasn't up to what we have today. And here the two co-founders, or the company they wanted to get this engine out, Dramatica Theory engine out. It was a program. It was a piece of software and they do sell it. It's very good. That could calculate your own story forms or the story forms of whatever movie you've seen. Let me explain. there's a story engine. There are four, as I said before, there are four main character elements that you decide, whether it's holistic or linear, whether do or beer, changed or steadfast, and there's a fourth one, stop or start. There are also four objective story choices you have to make, whether it's a success or a failure. That's one. I forget the other ones, but there are three others. It's a binary choice between one or the other. So you make you decide one, yes or no, A or B, through each of the four here, each of the four here, and then you decide for the four through lines where the conflict is within this chart. And so it takes that information, it calculates it, and it says, this is what you would see in the movie. Act 1 here, Act 2 here, Act 3, and it also fills in the rest of the information. There are about 70-something different bits of information that it just calculates based on what you put in. Now, they've been testing that every month since like 93 against movies. They would see a movie, and then the group of people gathered. They're just interested people off the street, but people who are interested in the theory will have a discussion, and they'll try and figure out the story form and figure out the one that most accurately fits the movie that they watched. Now, here's the interesting part. So in early 1990s, they had to release and publish this CD-ROM, whatever it was, and it could only contain so much information at that time. So they said, okay, all right, we can't make this so complex. We'll assume all the main characters. We'll assume by default a main character is a linear thinker. So it calculates the order of events and so forth. They did have holistic and linear in the theory, and you do decide, but what I'm saying is they had to compromise on certain things, and they had to use more male-oriented terminology so as not to confuse the audience, because it was a new theory. It was already groundbreaking and revolutionary. And I don't mean revolutionary to sound bombastic. I mean, truly, it is revolutionary. So this third person came up with a way of taking these thematic elements and phrasing it more like a movie theme or movie premise for the benefit of those Dramatica users who specifically want to use it to write screenplays or write stories. You may have noticed you can either use Dramatica to analyze a story that's already been produced, or you can use it to write your own story. It could work either way. It simply presents what elements would have to be in a story to make the argument that the writer is trying to express clear. If you're trying to put forward this premise, like let me see, or people may call it a theme or message, the author's message, like you shouldn't dawdle, or you shouldn't give up on your dreams. If you don't give up on your dreams, you can accomplish a lot. Something like that. You write it as a premise, or at least in the author's mind, he's thinking of that while he's expressing the story to argue that. And at the end of the story, you would see if it's a success. If the goal is successfully achieved. Aha! He didn't give up on his dreams. See, that's what the story is trying to argue. So this third person, the two co-founders, and then this third person who runs subtext.app, came up with his formula, and he took the elements in Dramatica and he kind of translated them into a formula to read more like a sentence, you can either abandon, well, I won't go into it deeply, but basically abandon or keep up, and that'd be the equivalent of changed or steadfast. Something, if you something, you can achieve your goal. And there are like maybe 16 something or other different formulae, or different kinds of sentences, formulas of sentences, depending on how you want to arrange the story. But he found, for example, when you apply that to a movie like Juno, the phrase works. I mean, the formula works. You plug it in, but it seemed like, I don't remember how it came across, but it seemed very goal oriented. But and it fit. I mean, you could take the problem, the objective story problem, and the goal and the theme and so forth, and you plug it into the formula. But it didn't seem to feel like what Juno really expressed. Like you don't feel that premise when you're watching Juno. So he adjusted it, and he came up with other formulae that were holistically oriented. And in many of them, the goal isn't even in part of the formula. I'll give you an example, which he gives in that video that I will link down at the bottom. Now, in the male-oriented version, or the linear-oriented version, imagine this: abandon stopping someone from going forward, and you can get a girlfriend. Okay, there's the problem, which is someone stopping someone from going forward. I think that's the problem. And the goal is get a girlfriend. Now, here's the holistic version of the exact same values of those elements. Address, and then here's the issue, being selfish. Address being selfish by balancing your overwhelming, and then here's the problem, stopping someone from going forward with your, and then here's the solution, looking for new challenges. So it reads, address being selfish by balancing your overwhelming, stopping someone from going forward with your looking for new challenges, which feels different from the linear male version, abandon stopping someone from going forward and you can get a girlfriend. The goal isn't even in there. And the issue, which is one of the elements in the through lines, plays much more of a part. Notice it's address. And then there are other formulae which include disconnects. In the holistic version, disconnects, being present, being in harmony, and I forget the other ones. I wrote the formulae down in a notebook, which I didn't want to bother to really hunt all over for because I really want to get this video out. But I hope you get a sense of how different it seems. Here, the one for do the right thing, the formula, once you put the traits, the problem and the solution, the theme and so forth, calculated for do the right thing. Once you put that into the formula for a holistic mindset for do the right thing, it comes out as being in harmony with thwarting someone keeps you from growing, allowing, worrying about a group's future to challenge relationships, which might seem or might feel more like the experience you'd have watching Do the Right Thing. I hope that's clear, and I hope you can understand what I'm using this for in order to more accurately, when I'm dressed as Samantha, to think and react and behave as a woman rather than a man. So it's not just about the costume, it's not just about outer appearance. I have taken into account scent, the five senses. Scent, I hope nobody would be tasting me, but uh, uh, smell, touch, I shave closely. I'm working on ways of improving on that. Uh, Smell, touch, taste, uh, seeing, and hearing. And as I mentioned in my prior video about feminizing my voice, that would be the hearing. And sight would involve a whole bunch of things like mannerisms and behavior and so forth. So outside of those five senses, you also have thought and mindset. I didn't want to overlook those two. So until next time, I'll leave you with this, and I hope you've been educated quite a bit. And I also hope that you look into Dramatica, not just for this Samantha project and so forth, but in general. It's very insightful. I wish more people would learn about it and understand it. It applies to psychology. It simply has given me tremendous insight into into sociology, into really the way the universe seems to operate, one aspect of the way the universe seems to operate. And to know me perhaps is to know that I am fascinated by the hidden underlying ways in which the universe operates. I've recently seen Oppenheimer, the movie Oppenheimer, and I identify with a lot of Oppenheimer, at least the depiction there, and from what I've read personally, he was a mystic. He read the Bhagavad Gita in the original Sanskrit. He was a deep thinker. I suspect he was philosophical. He had to have been philosophical to have read those mystical texts and thought about them enough to have quoted when he developed the bomb, to have thought of to have remembered that line from the Bhagavad Gita, I am death, the destroyer of worlds. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. So I imagine he was very insightful. He was very, I would say, introspective and very like philosophical and aware of himself and of his actions. So, all right, I'll leave you with that, and also mystical too. Like I'm passionately interested in Kabbalah. I've been interested in it for a long time. Kabbalah is the mystical and thematic, and I think the true heart of Judaism. So I'll leave you with that until next video. So long.